Hey, in today's episode, I wanted to give a little trigger warning because we are going to be talking about the NICU stay, cesarean, health issues with babies. It's a beautiful episode, and when you hear Mama Shani talk about how she turned the lemons into lemonade and knew what kind of questions to ask and how to stay curious in this new birth space that she found herself in, I want to emphasize again, getting into a birth class sooner rather than later and being able to address the fears that you have and understand how to switch gears if your baby needs something different. And as you'll hear Shani talk about, it was birth class that allowed her and Ben to have those early conversations, to make other plans, and to have the understanding of what would they need to do if things changed. And things changed. So let's get into it.
And I cried. And I mourned all the births that I envisioned with Sage. And I was aware there was a clarity of, this is my first lesson of listening to my child tell me what he needs. And I have to give him what he needs. And something in me says, he needs out. He shot up the red flag. He's done all the things. And now I have to trust that we're going to be all right. I told myself, hey, again, you were a 7-month preemie. Look at you all out and obnoxious in these halls, in these streets. We're going to be fine.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. Welcome to today's show. I am very thrilled to have Dr. Shani on. We call her Mama Shani most of the time. Shani came through my classes, during COVID. We've been friends forever. She is a doctor of acupuncture. She's a Navy vet. She's a Chinese medicine guru, has her master's in that. She's phenomenal. She works out of 2 offices, one specifically helping the community birth center downtown. She's magic. And she had a very unique birth story, and I'm really excited for her to share that. All 3 of us are NICU moms. We've all had a brush with the NICU. And I think that's one of the least talked about things when it comes to birth classes and stuff like that, because no one wants a baby that has to go to the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. However, sometimes it happens, and you don't lose all your power when you walk in those doors. You are still a parent. You still can advocate for your baby, for yourself. And taking kind of the mystery out behind the NICU is the proposed idea for today's episode. And also know that the nurses that work in the NICU are the cherry-picked, most beautiful humans on the earth because they do it all, they see it all. And I think they hold a lot of trauma because of what they see and what they do. So when you come in with a different perspective as a parent, which is what we're going to talk about today, I want you to understand that their perspective is that they see the worst of the worst. And when Ashley and I have NICU nurses that come to our classes that want to take hypnobirthing, they have a lot in their heads, right? They have seen visuals of the sickest of babies. So they're imagining their baby will be in the NICU. That's what they have lived. However, we have to get them out of that mindset and get them into your baby is different. Like the people that go to the NICU are just a tiny amount of all of the babies, even though those are all the babies you see. It's a tiny percentage. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for them to get out of their fear and what they're worried about. At the same time, they also know their friends in the NICU. There are other fellow nurses that would take amazing care of their babies. So it's a lot when it comes to NICU nurses, NICU experiences for parents, and us not having a traumatic experience when our baby goes to the NICU, but seeing it as a temporary holding place to get our babies well enough to come home and keeping a broader perspective on keeping connection, keeping the bonding going, and making the best of not a pleasant scenario in most cases. So, and we all have different experiences with the NICU, and that mine was kind of the worst case scenario. My baby was going to be dying. Ashley had a run by with 3, which is incredible and rare for a triplet mom. And Shani stayed in the NICU with her baby, and which is typical of what most of us are going to have in the NICU experience. So as we get into this, Questions are going to come up, and please share this episode with a friend so that they can get prepared ahead of time as much as possible, just in case. It takes the sting and the fears out if you're preparing for the just in cases.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to Shani today. And I think that the most appropriate place to start is at the beginning, not necessarily of the NICU stay, but your pregnancy journey, your journey to welcoming this baby, and I guess what your original sort of birth plan looked like. Because whenever we end up in the NICU, that's for most people, right? That's a side journey. That's not something we originally planned on. Unless you know right from the beginning, like I'm having 50 babies at a time or something like that. The NICU journey ends up being something that is a path you didn't expect to take. So maybe talk a little bit about your journey to meet your most beautiful baby in the world. He is the most beautiful baby in the world. Maybe even going back to finding out you were pregnant and what that process was like going through that, and then into the preparing for the birth.
Absolutely. So I initially got pregnant in early 2019, and I didn't know much. I was not a part of the birth community at that time. I knew two things. I knew I needed to reach out and find a doula immediately after peeing on a stick. And I'd already heard of the hypnobirthing classes with Care and how if you can do nothing else, do these classes. So I immediately signed up for my birthing classes for an info session. And I reached out and found an amazing doula who is now an amazing midwife that I get the privilege to work with, Nikki Helms. I lost that pregnancy somewhere between 8 and 10 weeks. And I remember reaching out to both of these individuals and letting them know, I no longer need your services. This is what's going on. And it's funny, until this moment, I forgot, Care, how you reached immediately back out to me, checking on me. Are you okay? How are you doing? And this amazing doula that I called just showed up and brought her connections with the birth community and really held me. So I really feel like that was part of my pregnancy journey, because literally 9 months, right around the time we would have been expecting that child, is when I was able to confirm Sage's arrival, my son's arrival. So that child, I really felt, pulled me into birth work. So I got a chance to learn some things that led to my desires with Sage's pregnancy to be different. I think initially I would have never had the vision I had for Sage's birth that I had if it had not been for this 10-month journey, really. And so for all intents and purposes, I had planned by the time Sage was going to arrive in summer of 2020, I knew where in my living room I wanted my birth tub and where I was going to put all the twinkle lights. And I was going to go on this crazy, amazing, hard, yet meaningful journey and birth him into the world in the water in my living room after walking my entire property for hours. That was my plan.
And you were the only one in birth class that was planning a home birth. Everybody else was like, on your first? Like, they were freaked out. And you were like, yeah, I'm going to do that.
And at this point, I had seen birth too. I think by that point, I had been present for 4 births. And they had run the gambit. One had been unmedicated, hospital birth center. One had been a VBAC that started in the birth center that we transferred to the hospital and still had her VBAC. So I knew like the different ways it could go, and I was still comfortable with that, but I was still holding on to my plan. And I made it through 4 out of 5 classes of my hypnobirthing education before I went in for a 30-week scan, because we had seen some possible issues with my placenta insertion. Nothing that was overly concerning initially, but something we wanted to keep an eye on. And that was the morning where everything changed. I had a couple of questionable blood pressure readings, but I was, with my Chinese medicine knowledge and the resources I had there, I was really doing my best to keep things under control so I could keep Sage in and minimize any additional work concerns we would have. But by the time I sat down with the doctor, mind you, this is the height of COVID, my now husband was in the car. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. He's in the car on FaceTime, and this doctor is apologetically telling me that, yes, you are 30 weeks and 4 days, but your baby is measuring about 27. We're really concerned about this thing called IUGR and looking at your high blood pressure readings last week. We really think we need to do some monitoring in the hospital. And I could feel like he was dancing around something. And the thing he was dancing around was, and he eventually told me, he's like, you're not leaving the hospital without your baby have been born, basically. So we don't know if it's going to be 2 days, 2 weeks, 5 weeks. We don't know. But you're going there now. And so Ben and I got together. I went down to the car. We drove to the hospital. I made a list of things that I wanted him to bring me. I got into the room. They got me hooked up. He went to start grabbing things. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in this room thinking about the classes we just had and thinking about, okay, so I just need to reframe. We're going to reframe. So this is the scene. This is the scene. I know I can have a beautiful birth here. I've been in this building. I've seen them. They happen, right?
And it was right after fear release. We had done fear release the night before.
Yes. And I was really sitting with this idea of like, so if I stay scared of the worst case scenario, then I'm inviting that in. So let's let that go. And so I was like, okay, so the twinkle lights will go here. And I'm going to have my music and I'm going to have all this stuff. And we're just going to roll. And I'm like, 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks. 2 hours, 2 days, 2 weeks. If I can stay here for 2 hours and I can stay here for 2 days, if I can stay here for 2 days, I can stay here for 2 weeks. My goal was to keep Sage inside as long as humanly possible. And while Ben was home getting stuff, he called me as I had one of those moments when anybody who's been in the hospital and something is a little off will notice that you get left alone, right? There's a lot of downtime if you're birthing within the hospital system. There's a lot of nobody's really in your room except for you and whoever you brought with you. And then suddenly that's not the case. For those of us who know, we know that that's a shift. Something just happened. We saw something on the monitor down the hall, and now everybody who's free has been called into your space. And Bennett just called me to check to make sure he had grabbed the right things as they're telling me, hey, can you get up right now? Can you get on hands and knees? Can you move? And I remember that was the first time I freaked out. That was the first time I was like, okay, this might not be able to be reframed in the way I want to reframe it. As the nurse lovingly took my phone and said, is this Ben? And I said, uh-huh. She's like, Ben, we just need you to get here right now, okay? All right, thanks. I was so grateful in that moment because I didn't know what to say because he can hear and he's like, what's going on? Luckily, we got Sage's heart rate back on track. Everything seemed fine. We go back to getting me the steroids that they give you when they're concerned they may have to take your baby preemie, right? And I knew from my own experience, I'm a 7-month preemie as well. I knew how important those steroids could be. So I was like, let's just get your breathing online because I know if we get your breathing online, this can be better. So they ran that first bag. Nightfall started to hit. We ran the second bag. We're going to try to get a good night's sleep. I'm still trying to hold on for like as many more days as I can keep him inside. We're going to be fine. For some reason, around 3, 4 in the morning, they send a resident in with an ultrasound machine. Seemed weird. And about a couple of hours later, here comes the overnight team. One of the things I have to say about going through the 4 out of the 5 classes and knowing what I knew is that these were conversations that I could be a part of instead of being talked at or to or being dictated a plan to. And so the tone of the conversation very much stayed like that, even though they were pretty clear that they were not encouraged by what they were seeing with my placenta, with Sage's experience inside. They were not encouraged. And they gave me 2 options. They were like, we can hang out and we can wait and just see what happens. And if something happens, we can have Sage out in 5 minutes. Or there's one other birthing person that's been laboring all night who's about to hit the ER. There's no one else in front of you outside of that person. We have a fresh team coming online right now because, it's shift change. We have the team down in NICU has been briefed on your situation. They are fresh and waiting for you, ready for you and your child. And we can do whatever you want to do. And I told them all to get out of my room. And I cried. And I mourned all the births that I envisioned with stage. And I was aware there was a clarity of, this is my first lesson of listening to my child tell me what he needs. And I have to give him what he needs. And something in me says, he needs out. He shot up the red flag. He's done all the things. And now I have to trust that we're going to be all right. I told myself, hey, again, you were a 7-month preemie. Look at you all loud and obnoxious in these halls, in these streets. We're going to be fine. Thanks to, again, the class, Ben and I had already had the conversation. If, heaven forbid, if they separate me from my baby, I'm going to be all right. Will you go with our baby? Because he can't speak for himself, right?
I just wanted to ask if you had your doula, and this was the height of COVID. So can you just speak to being in this situation as someone who had planned to have a doula, if you still had that doula in your periphery, like on the phone or anything, or if you guys were just in it by yourselves making these decisions?
I had reached out the night before to my doula via phone, because at that time we were talking, most of my prenatal visits had been me solo, which was, even the doctor called out as he's telling me, hey, I'm sitting into the hospital watching my husband's face on the screen fall, realizing something was not okay. I had reached out to her the day before and told her my plan, told her what I was feeling, what I was thinking. I think this was before the drama with the heart rate started. And then I had reached out to her that morning too, once we had decided, okay, because again, in the hospital, unless it truly is an emergency, things don't happen quickly, right? So even though we did tell them, okay, let's get him out, he seems like he needs to come out, there was still lots of waiting while we waited for our time in the OR. So I had time to check in. And again, it was just via phone. And it was very helpful to have her support and to have someone I could reach out to, because this is a thing I always feel, especially as someone coming into someone else's relationship with a doula. I feel like there's a lot of worries about replacing people, which, I'm sorry, even if we hung out every day of your entire pregnancy, I can't duplicate the intimacy with which that baby was created. Therefore, there's no replacing. There is only, hey, I'm here. It's really that objective third party. They're not a part of medical staff. They're not a part of your birth staff, the professionals in the room who have to give you whatever party lines that hospital policy says they have to give you, right? They're someone who understands this was not your plan. How do I ask the right questions to make sure you're coping with the changes? And how do, in the aftermath, I support you? So I definitely felt being able to call was just someone who knew me was a game changer. So it really did help the shift. So when the staff comes back in and I tell them, okay, we're going to do this, eventually the nurse comes in and is like, hey, so did you want a wheelchair to go into the OR or did you want to walk? And I'm like, I'm going to walk. Of course I'm going to walk. So she comes and gets me and we head down to the OR. I've got my phone fully charged. I've got all my playlists. I roll in and I meet my anesthesiologist and he's like, hey, so I've got this really cool resident here. Is it okay if he does your spinal? And I'm like, are you okay with him doing your spinal? He's like, yeah, I'd let him do my spinal. I'm like, all right, then he could do my spinal. What's up? You know? He's like, okay, cool. So I've got my Bluetooth speaker. Do you like music? I'm like, I sure do. Here's my phone. Push play.
When you walked in, they didn't even know what it was.
They're like, okay. I totally started with like the hypnobirthing list because I'm thinking, I'm going to need to be calmed down. 30 seconds in, I'm like, you know what? Give me that back. Hold on. Just kidding. I picked a different playlist. I picked actually the playlist that I was creating for Sage's birth. It felt appropriate. I'm chatting up the anesthesiologist. He's telling me about these barbecues that they would have as a team and at before times, and they'd rotate different houses and how he likes to spatchcock his chicken on the grill. And I'm like, tell me more. And we're talking seasonings. I'm like, oh, I've got these Sichuan peppercorns. You've got to get into your life. I go home days later and get him some and make sure they got in his hot little hand. It was that kind of conversation. They've got me numbed up. They're getting me strapped in. I'm like, all right, cool. OBs introducing themselves on the other end. Hey, my name's so-and-so. And I'm like, cool, cool, cool. So I know the head of OBGYN over at the Hillcrest location. She used to be my gynecologist and she did my previous surgery. So just like, oh, her. Oh yeah, she's made me re-suture before. We're going to take good care of you. We promise. I'm like, yeah, you better. Meanwhile, we're all chatting it up. Eventually, they're like, okay, we're going to get started. I'm like, okay. Still talking food and recipes over here and music, telling them I'm in a band and blah, 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 blah. They're opening me up and they're like, wow, you have a beautiful uterus. I'm like, don't I though? Thank you. I mean, that room was hype. And I've said this before and I say it again. You're going to get a bill. So own the space. Your rental of that room will come due. So own it while you're there. And I very much felt in that moment that everything was as good as it could possibly be given the circumstances.
You literally built your team.
Literally. Even in my professional life, when I come into birth spaces, I always say and put the energy out that only the people who belong in this space are going to be here. People with weird, funky energy are going to feel like they need to help with somebody else's situation. And that's fine. They asked me, do you want to meet your son? And I said, yes. And they lifted him up as a song by Takuya Kuroda called Everybody Loves the Sunshine starts playing. And this little, he looked like his arms were up and he was, like just all attitude. And I was like, that's my baby. Just strong. He gave the impression of strength. And that was it. That was my baby. He was smaller than they thought he would be. He was 2 pounds, 2 ounces. Just the cutest little wrinkly old man you ever did see. You know, and I knew what to do. I'd had my lactation education at this point. So, you know, I'm like, okay, y'all meet me in the recovery room with my breast pump. Ben, you go with the baby. All right, I'm in the recovery room and I'm trying to figure out this. And eventually I get upstairs. And this was the only part that, you know, especially it being COVID, that was harder for me because I was alone for the most part of this journey. And I knew why I was alone. I knew I was alone because Ben needed to be with Sage. Ben needed to walk up to NICU. Ben needed to get the lay of the land. Ben needed to be introduced to the people who are going to be taking care of our baby. Ben needed to witness that so that we had that sense of security. And so I knew that we were okay, but it was, you know, and I'm hoping the drugs kind of mellowed it out a little bit for me, but it was a little hard getting to the recovery room on my own and then getting upstairs on my own to postpartum. And then it just felt like the longest day ever because this was in the morning and it wasn't until 5 or 6 o'clock that they were able to say, okay, you can go down and see your son. That felt like time stood still.
And was that because they were stabilizing you or because they were stabilizing him or a little bit of both? Do you know why it took so long for them to get you there?
They weren't stabilizing me because at that moment we didn't know the issues that were coming for me. I think they were still assessing him, considering the fact that he was smaller than they anticipated and kind of trying to do all the things they do with the NICU baby, gauging how healthy is this baby. We were very fortunate in that at the end of the day, when it was all said and done and all the tests that come back after the first, 24, 48 hours, Sage just needed to get bigger and stronger. That was it. We were so lucky and fortunate that he was so incredibly healthy. To the point where 4 days after cesarean, they're talking about discharge. It was a Sunday morning. I remember they got Sage out on a Thursday. We were supposed to be discharged on Sunday. And some lab work didn't look great on me. And I'd already started kind of wrapping my head around, okay, cool, I'm going to go home, I'm going to shower, and I'm going to come back to the hospital and hang out with my baby. And they're like, why don't you stay one more night? And I'm like, okay. Not a hard ask. I'm 2 floors away from my baby versus across town. And it was Sunday afternoon that my preeclampsia actually came back and peaked. What a lot of people don't know is that preeclampsia can peak postpartum. And I can honestly tell you, with my level of stubbornness, I don't know that I would have recognized the issues for what they were had I gone home. And I'm super grateful that someone looked at my lab numbers and said, let's not be in a hurry. Let's just hang out, because I wound up that afternoon. I was on my way to go see Sage, and they were like, let's do your blood pressure and everything first, and then we'll send you downstairs.
And that is one of the most dangerous things, is that parents go home and they're so distracted by a newborn and nobody has warned them, like, hey, if your headaches come back, if, hey, if this, and they are so distracted that it can be dire before they know that they should have already gone in.
And isn't it just such the way with especially women that we just set aside our discomfort, our aches, our pains, or whatever, because we have to take care of everybody else, or we have to get our responsibilities done, or whatever it is. And so we don't even take the time to check in with ourselves and say, like, I don't feel good. Or if I do, oh, well, I have shit to do, you know? And so I think you're right on. I think that there was an angel definitely looking out for you, seeing that little something to be like, oh, just stay here.
Yeah, because the really scary thing for me is I didn't have the classic preeclampsia signs. I never got a headache. I never got all the things that I knew to look for. So I know for a fact, had I been at home I probably would have been in NICU by that time. I probably would have gone home and come back by that time. And that's like my only saving grace of, hopefully I would have been on the NICU floor and would have pulled the thing on the wall and said, he's fine, I'm not, help me. But I'm super grateful that I was not put in that position, because I did not get up out of bed until the next morning, because we had to go back to magnesium. We had to go back to all the things that they thought was going to be a solution for me wasn't. So we had to try a different med, because that's how blood pressure is, right? And it was a thing. I often joke and say my postpartum body, the only thing it was willing to do was make milk. I got very fortunate in that of course, there was the tenacity of, I will do this. I didn't get my third trimester, but I can do this, right? There was a little bit of that, and I was super lucky. And I know not everyone is as fortunate to have the lactation education that I had, have the guidance, know where to look for answers, because I wasn't planning on pumping before I had to pump, right? I was able to nourish myself and be at the state where, even with my preeclampsia, I was actually told to start hiding how much milk I was bringing down to NICU. That's how much my body was willing to give me. And I'm super grateful for that, because I know that's not everyone's story, but it did require me to know things, right? I don't think a lot of people know that, okay, if you wind up on a pumping journey, you need to do it every 3 hours. Even if you think you're getting nothing, you need to do it every 3 hours. And it's not going to be comfortable at first, because your body's never done this before and you're hooking yourself up to this machine. And you might want to get yourself some coconut oil. That was my savior. A lot of the other things that the lanolin, that didn't really work for me as well. But I found with the coconut oil, I was able to massage all of everything and warm myself up and get myself to the point where, like, okay, and here we go again. And then I also knew to prioritize a pump between that 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. window, when the lactation hormone is at its peak, sending my body these signals, even while also trying to prioritize the opportunity that being 2 weeks hospitalized postpartum gives you, which is somebody else is taking care of your baby and you can sleep as much as you can sleep in a hospital with people bothering you every 20 minutes. I was able to say, okay, so hey, team, if we could tonight, I'm going to pump at 1:15 and then I'm going to sleep until about 4:45 and I'm going to pump again and try to get myself the longest stretch of sleep I could get during that time. But also, yes, and making sure I was still pumping every 3 hours to make sure I was telling my body that this was something that was important to me. I also got very lucky in that when they got ready to give Sage that first feed and my body was taking a little time, they explicitly said, we're going to wait another 12 hours before we give him donor milk. We're going to give you a chance. And I said, thank you. And I remember feeling, it made me feel a kind of way. Like, we're going to give you a chance to be the one to feed your baby. That was just a gorgeous gift, a beautiful gift that I was given.
And I think because you had taken such a strong lead in this is how I'm going to do it, because you were so educated, that they were like, how do we support this mom? Right? Because it's quick and easy for them to give donor milk. And a lot of times it's not donor milk, right? It's not. But when a mom comes in very educated and determined and say, no, mom milk, that's what I would like to give my baby. Thank goodness that they were reciprocal to that and supportive, because that makes a huge difference after you've been through what you didn't want to go through and are sitting in a hospital room trying to figure out your own health. But your determination and your willingness to figure out a relationship with the staff, it's the connection. That's how that works. Hats off, Mom.
Yeah, I remember spending a lot of those first hours. Ben was sleeping on that really uncomfortable chair couch pull-out thing, and I would be up pumping, and I literally would be Googling NICU, Googling pumping, and all these tips and listening to podcasts. I'm like, well, if I got to be up anyways to pump, I got to get this information. And learning that, hey, you can have primary nurses. You can say, hey, I really like that nurse. When she's on shift, I want her with my baby. You can do that. You can say, hey, I really didn't like this person in my room with my baby. I didn't like the way they treated my baby. I don't like the way they talked to me about my baby. I need to talk to the charge nurse and make sure that person never enters our room again. I think we only ever had to do that once, where I was like, the energy was just off. And I'm like, I don't want you. I don't want you. So it was really nice to be able to know that even on that level, you had that kind of control and that kind of power in terms of the taking care of your baby, even though you're not taking care of your baby. And then learning about cares, right? Learning about, okay, every 3 hours, they're going in and doing all these things and saying, okay, cool. I didn't get to hold Sage for a week. So the only way I could touch my son was to be a part of, all right, here we are. Every 3 hours, we got to open the isolette. We got to change his diaper, take his temperature, do all these things. And I'm like, cool. And it helped, especially because Sage was so tiny. Like, you look at him and you're like, I don't want to touch you. You're going to break. It's like your porcelain or fine china. And here comes the nurse just opening the diaper, picking up the legs, doing the things. And I'm like, all right. So I was able to borrow that confidence and be like, well, you didn't break when she did this. So and I literally just making my hands do exactly what her hands did and getting in there and taking care of my baby. It felt like I was still his mom. I was still the one. Being able to notice that he perked up when he heard our voice, being able to put on the same playlist we put on when he was born and having him start looking around. Even at 2 pounds, this child was trying to pick his head up like, who just walked into my room? I'm like, calm all the way down, little man.
Did you ask for that kind of assistance with the baby, or did they offer it, or how did that take place so we can help other listeners figure out how they can be a part of that journey to be the mom to that baby?
It's kind of blurry. I don't know if this was something I had picked up from a podcast or something I listened to that first night, but because I know the first time I saw him, I was definitely very, like, we had put our hands in and I was just afraid to do anything. And I didn't know we could be apart. I don't think it was till the second, maybe third day that I knew that we could actively say, hey, I'm going to be here for cares. Are you on the half or the 45 schedule? Because I just need to know when to come in.
Can you explain what that is, the half hour 45 schedule?
So at the hospital we were at, all of the babies were either on the half hour. So let's say we were going to do cares at 5:30, or they were going to get cares at 5:45 in the morning. So depending on the schedule of your nurse, that's when they would be going in to see your baby, check their temperature, change their diaper, do a feed if they were feeding already, and check all the things. Usually they would also put them in a different position because you don't want to keep a baby just on one side because they're not doing a whole lot of moving, right? And so that's what they call their cares. And so one of the things that I always tell folks if they wind up in NICU is find out when your cares are going to happen and explicitly say that I want to be a part of them. And I will aim on being here for this cares and this cares and this cares. Because what I also found was, depending on the nurses on that shift and who had to call in and whatever happened, that could change from day to day. And so if you made it explicit that these are the cares that I will almost always be at, they would wait for me. Some of them would. Some folks just, you know how work is. Some people go in to do their work and they want to get it done so they can get to the next thing. But the ones that cared and knew you cared and wanted to support that, they would wait. Because I will say there are things that definitely happened in our NICU journey. Sage was in NICU for just over 6 weeks that I didn't love. I wasn't there for his first bath. I was not given the option to be there for that first bath, which again allowed me the opportunity to say, so next time I'm going to need a phone call, send me a message saying this is the day we do them. What days do you tend to do baths? Is there a day you tend to do baths? I want to know because I want to be here and be a part of it. The sad point of fact is there are so many different situations. We were already in COVID. I had already shut down my acupuncture clinic because I didn't know how to keep myself safe and I didn't know how to keep other people safe at that time. And we could afford it. My husband's job could cover us in other areas. So I had the time and energy to just dedicate to being there when I eventually was discharged. And I know that's not every new parent's reality. There are babies in NICU that are not getting as much time with their parents for a litany of reasons. Sometimes it's because they live an hour and a half away and they also have to work and there's also other children and there's also all the things of life. So I felt very fortunate to be able to spend as much time as I did in NICU, even after my discharge, because everything we know about the science of skin to skin and how that can help a baby regulate, they said we weren't going to get home before 10 weeks. They said you'll be lucky to get home before 10 weeks. And we were home in 6. And I firmly believe that's because as many hours as I could, once I could hold him, I was in NICU with him on my chest for as long as humanly possible, to the point where I'm sure I broke rules. I'm sure I turned my chair away from the door and said, let me know before you come in, and propped myself up with pillows and the breastfeeding nursing pillow and that. I'm like, we both, don't tell nobody, we both gonna take a nap. You're not supposed to do that, by the way. But it was our way of staying connected and our way of creating a situation where he could just get better. I remember they kept moving him. And I didn't know that the way NICU is set up, you have the sickest babies on one end. And as they get healthier, they don't need a one-on-one nurse. And so they start moving him down the hall. And they move him down the hall. Okay, you can be with a team of 2 nurses. Okay, we're going to move you down the hall. Okay, you can be 3 babies to a nurse now. So we're going to put you in a whole different, on the other side of the door. And I'm like, why do you keep moving my baby? And they're like, because he's in the feeders and growers section now. He's fine. He doesn't have any health issues that we need to be overly monitoring. He just needs to eat and go home. I'm like, oh, that's good to know. Thank you for telling me. Because otherwise, I'm like, why do you keep moving my baby? I'm trying to get a routine. I need the routine. It's all I have right now. But we were very fortunate in that. And it was the scariest, most empowering. Here's the other thing that you're not supposed to admit about being in a situation where somebody else is taking care of your newborn and you're newly postpartum. There was a little part of me that was like, cool, you're not sending me home with this brand new baby because I don't know what to do. I'm supposed to know what to do, but I don't know what to do. So show me what to do. I've worked with well over 30 birthing folks now, and there's always that little bit of, okay, all right, we just did a lot of work, and this baby just showed up, and now, oh, you just gonna send me home? Like, we okay. Okay.
It's the most terrifying thing, right? Because we plan all the pregnancy and the birth and the labor and the delivery, and then that car ride home with that newborn is the slowest drive you'll ever take, the most nerve-wracking. And then you're like, now what? This is illegal. They shouldn't just send us home with this kid, especially with a NICU baby.
I tell people all the time, I look back at, I was 25 when my kids were born. I had 3 babies at one time. And I'm like, who did I think I was taking 3 babies home? I had never seen babies that small. I had never taken care of more than one baby at a time, like in that intimate of a setting, even though I worked in childcare. And I was literally like you said, they're going to break. I'm going to be the one that breaks them. And nobody's holding me responsible. What are they thinking sending these babies home with me? Shani, I think any NICU parent who's gone through it would completely agree with you, right? That there is a blessing in that, all the hardness and the difficulty and everything. And I've, as a triplet mom, met so many NICU parents because most triplets come early. They all say it. It's only people who haven't actually been in the NICU that have shit to say about the NICU and think that they know what it's like and think that they would know better and do things differently and all of that stuff. There are beautiful blessings to the NICU, to the people that you meet, to the things that you learn, and you come home with tools and skills that so many parents do not come home with their first baby. And that's part of the gift that Sage gave by coming early and being born in the NICU, is you being able to come home so prepared and so trained and so skilled in caring, in cares, because you had all that time with him. Can you talk about, as your NICU journey was coming to an end, because I hear a lot of the sort of like, it's never going to happen, it's never going to happen, then boom, all of a sudden, bring your car seat. What did the last week or so look like? What did that lead up to him going home look like? Was it all of a sudden? Was it he's going home tomorrow? What was the end of that journey like for you guys?
Okay. For us, it was a little different. Of course, it always is. As a veteran, my birth and my child's first 7 days of life were covered by the VA. And then after that, we had to do my husband's insurance. My husband had Kaiser and we were at UCSD. And we had just had a conversation with the staff about Sage was doing so well. You're probably looking at going home within a week. We have been working on bottle feeding because, for those who don't know, bottle feeding is how you get out of NICU. A child has to be a certain size and strength to be able to nurse and maintain their weight gains. It's just the science of it all, right, when they're so small. But we were doing really good. Like, we had just had a conversation where they were like, you're probably a week away from the car seat test and going home. And I'm like, great. We go home. And literally, as we're sitting down at dinner, get a phone call saying, Kaiser is coming to collect your baby tomorrow and move him to their NICU. I have never seen my husband Papa Bear like he Papa Beared with those people on the phone saying that if his baby gets COVID because of all this nonsense, he's going to sue, amongst other things that he said on the phone to the people. I'm like, baby, you can't make that. I love you. But, you know, we were pretty livid at this point and really concerned. But it wound up, again, these blessings in disguise. So they spent a grip of money. They have one team in Fontana whose sole job is to move NICU babies. So this team of 4 people come down, they hit the county line, they get a second ambulance to follow them. Everybody shows up at the hospital together. They sent me home with 2/3 of the amount of milk that I had left there because they're like, we have never transported this much before. We don't even know where to put it. Please take it home. They transferred my baby into their isolette, got everything hooked up, put it in the ambulance. Ben and I followed in our cars to the next hospital.
I can't even imagine that. Like, it makes my stomach hurt thinking about how scary that is.
It was super scary. But here's the flip side. So we get to the new hospital and I walk in and I get to see my baby for the first time with no tubes in his face. Because different hospitals have different things that they connect to. And the NICU doctor turned to me and said, I am so sorry. I do not know why this baby is here. I see that you are planning on doing ad-lib feeding starting tomorrow. So we've just decided, since we have different tubes and things here, right? Everybody uses different brands. We're just not going to put another feeding tube in and see how he does. Is that cool with you? I'm like, hell yeah. They let Ben and I both be there because The new hospital still had a one parent visiting policy, but for check-in day, they let us both be there, showing us the lay of the land, very different things that they had and policies that they had. And then the nurse came in and was like, this was a Thursday or a Friday. She's like, I will be surprised if you're still here next week. We go home after getting Sage settled and spending some time with him. I go back the next day. We swap out. Ben has some time. By the time we get home, we get a call from the nurse saying, you both need to show up tomorrow. It was a Saturday. You both need to show up tomorrow because we need to give you your briefing on going home with your baby. You're going home on Sunday. So he probably came home 3 or 4 days earlier because of all of that. And so again, it wound up being one of these, like, as angry and frustrated as we were with the system, we got to take him home. And I think it kind of helped, Ashley, like you're saying, we had that 6 weeks of time to build up. And just as soon as I may have maybe fears and doubts and thoughts would have started creeping in, there was no time or room for that. There was just like, this is nonsense. Give me my baby. Give me my baby. Let's get out of here. So that was a shift. That was how we got home. So it felt very good. It felt very chaotic. And therefore it felt very good to come home.
Also, isn't so validating for them to walk into that new hospital with your baby and have them be like, he's amazing. This baby's amazing. Why is he even here? I just can't imagine like the pride you must have felt when that doctor was like, I am so sorry. Like, you don't even need to be here. Yeah, that's right. Because my baby's perfect and strong and beautiful and amazing. But I have to say, I know the hospital that you were at and the hospital that you transferred to. And having worked in San Diego for 10 years, it sounds weird to say this, those are my two favorite NICUs. They both have the private rooms. They both have that really incredible support for parents that you couldn't have been in two better places. And even if you had to transfer, I'm glad that you transferred where you did. Because there are other NICUs around San Diego that I don't have the warm and fuzzies for. But the two that took care of Sage they're in my heart for sure. So I'm really glad that those were the teams you had.
Yeah, me too. I believe her words were, we don't transfer healthy babies. I'm like, right? Look at him being healthy. That is still one of my favorite pictures of Sage because he has this look on his face because he was always pulling that feeding tube out anyways. Babies are smart. They're not dumb. I have a picture of him totally with this like, look at me, mom, check it out look on his face when I walked into that space and he saw me. It was a whole different getting to see him. It's so scary. I remember the way certain things look when you have such a tiny baby and all these cords and these IVs and all the things, like the day he got his IV out. Oh my gosh, all the different things that happen to them that you have no control over because these are the tools we have at this point, right? 21st century, thank goodness, because, where would we be without some of the tools and skills and procedures to keep these teeny tiny babies alive? But still, when you see your baby connected to these tubes that are almost as big as your baby, there were things that my brain thought I saw that I was like, I just can't think about that right now. I have to hear them say that he's okay and believe that. And I just have to be really careful and not think about these tubes connected to my baby's heart. I have to ignore that that's the case because it's so hard. And I've thought long and hard because one of the things that we actually are working on now is we do want another child. And it has taken some time for us to get to a point, Sage is 3.5 now, to get to a point where I had to come to grips with, do I want another child because I feel like I missed out? Am I going to be okay if I miss out again? My midwives at the hospital were very clear that after reviewing my case, after reviewing everything that happened, they're like, there is no guarantee that this would happen again. In fact, the stats are pretty good at this not repeating itself. And then knowing what I know about the medicine that I practice, I knew that there were things I could do to prepare myself. And I have done those things in order to reduce the possibility, but I have to know that we could wind up in a similar position. And we have still decided to go forward with trying to have another child. But it changes everything, because there are definitely things about the experience that are traumatizing. But I'm just really grateful that with the preparation that I had, I feel like it was a lot less traumatic than it could have been. And I felt very held and taken care of.
I'm glad that you chose birth education, because I think we do go through a lot of those scenarios in class, at least we do in our series, to get people prepared and thinking ahead. Because when you and your partner are already on teamwork for whatever plan shows up, it makes a huge difference in how we handle the flow with everything. What advice would you give parents if they have a NICU stay, if things sway some way different? Obviously, you've just given us a really good pattern for owning your freaking birth and getting to know your staff and building that connection and communication right from the get-go, because it's still your birth, whether it comes out the sunroof or the front door, still your birth. What advice would you give parents for communicating with those lovely nurses, expressing what they need to express, and also going through that mourning process while they're in the NICU?
My rule has always been with hospital staff is to come out on the curious side. Be curious about what they're saying needs to happen or what they say is going to happen, so that you can invite yourself into the conversation. Because I feel like what happens a lot, and where a lot of birth trauma can come from, is because this is what the people on the other side do every day. This is what we do every day. And these are the decisions we have to make every day. And this is what we have to do because this is procedure, blah, blah, blah. And it sometimes, for some of them, can be easy to forget that there are people on the other side of these decisions. And so by expressing curiosity, by communicating when you're confused, when you don't understand, when you need a little help, like getting on board with the plan, and knowing that you are well within your rights to ask any and all questions before anything happens, because this is your body and this is your baby. There are very few things that are truly emergencies. And they will almost always say yes when you ask for 5 minutes to discuss it with your partner. Or can we discuss it with you? Or can we ask some questions first? There are very few times, and you will know them, when the bed starts moving before they finish speaking. This is an emergency. We don't have a whole lot of time. But if that's not the case, keep asking questions until you are clear about the plan. Know that there are options, even if you don't like either of them. I feel like anybody who's parented a toddler knows about giving options that are not the options that the person that has to make the choice want to hear, but they're still your options. You're either going to go to bed now or go to bed in 5 minutes after you potty. These are the choices you have. And in the hospital scenario, I feel like because so few of us have hospital experience before as a patient, right? Some of us, the only opportunity we're ever going to have is when we go and have a baby. And so it's all foreign territory. And yes, these doctors and these nurses are intelligent and brilliant at what they do. They understand how to keep you alive and keep your baby alive. But at the same time, making sure you raise your hand, remind them of your humanity, and express your need to be a part of the decision-making process, even if the decisions are clearly not what you would have ever chosen. No one would ever choose the NICU experience. It is so scary and it's so heartbreaking to walk down those halls and see babies who are not even a pound at birth. And like you said at the top, the things that NICU nurses see, that's a special kind of human to choose that life. That is a special kind of human. And I've often said, even as a birth worker, I don't believe anybody gets into this practice of medicine, this area of work, because they don't care. I think systems can change the way people operate. I think a lot of these people are overworked and not compensated for the miracles that they get to be a part of every single day. And we've all had a bad day at work. So I really try to give the benefit of the doubt while still speaking up for myself. So if you can walk that line, whenever you're dealing with, honestly, anyone in the world, but especially when you're in that very delicate space, I think that's the best way to have the best outcome for a situation that no one would ask for. And I also think that's how you stay open to the lesson that these babies are trying to teach us in their journey. I often remind people that, I love care, how you say in class, this is not your birth. You've had your birth. This is not about you. Don't take it personal. This is not about you. But on some level, when this baby chose you and their parents and their birth time and situation and journey and the lessons that you needed to learn in order to be their parent, it wasn't personal. It was to get us to a certain outcome. And so by keeping that energy and that spirit about you, I really feel like that's how you stay open to the lessons that these little souls are trying to teach on their way into the world.
Well, and I want to just hypothetically, but I'm kind of almost sure of it. You being a NICU baby yourself 40 years ago, you created a completely different experience for your son than you had. So on some level, do you feel like there was some healing that took place for what little Shani didn't get in her premature experience as compared to what mighty Sage got in his?
I do, because my mom tells the story of she remembers when they took me and her turning over and saying, hey, baby, and nobody in that OR has that memory but her, right? Whatever cocktail they had her on, she was not able to be as present right away. And no one gave her the opportunity. We didn't know, we should have known, but we didn't know as much as we knew about how important breast milk is for NICU babies at that time. It was just an assumption of, well, we're just going to give her formula and this is what we're going to do because clearly you had your baby too early and you're not going to make milk, which we know is not true. You've made milk as of the second phase of your pregnancy. There is milk there. Colostrum comes. It is triggered by the separation of the placenta from the uterine wall. So there is milk there, but that wasn't even an option for her. And the fact that we even got to a point where after Sage came home, he was fully nursing, fully breastfed. He would get the bottle if we were going to go to dinner or something, and he would still take a bottle, which was very helpful and wonderful for us. But we were exclusively breastfed after a month or so. And even getting to that part was something that was never afforded my mom and me when it was our turn. So I definitely feel like that night I was thinking of a lot of similarities. Like, oh, I only made it to 7 months. So I wonder what that's about. What is it about that magical last 2 months? I don't know. Being in a hurry, maybe. I jokingly say I think MTV debuted that week and I was already on my musical journey, needed to hurry up.
I'm sure it was MTV.
I'm sure it was.
Well, I just love what you said about staying curious. And I think that theme of staying curious about the lessons the babies are bringing us and staying curious about continuing to ask questions. I've gotten chills, 50 times over the course of this episode with things that you said that some of the stuff I felt like you pulled it right out of my head. Like I was going to ask you a question and then you said the thing that I was going to ask you. But as you were talking about that, I think that's something that I really try to get across to parents and what I, with my doula clients is that you go to classes, you learn as much as you can, but you don't have to know everything to be an authority on your body and your baby and your decision-making in the birth room. That like, especially first-time parents, like you've never parented this child before, but guess what? You're going to be making all the parenting decisions for them. And you've never had a baby before, but guess what? It's your body. And that staying curious and that, like you said, continuing to ask questions, ask until you are satisfied, unless it's a screaming emergency, which is almost never, right? That's 1% of the time that they're moving the bed while they're still talking to you. That I just love that lesson of stay curious, keep asking questions until you are comfortable, until you are satisfied, until you feel safe, because the vast majority of us are not medical practitioners having babies. We're just humans going into a medical space to give birth to our babies. And you can ask questions, ask for things, make modifications, ask for time as much as you need to feel comfortable. And I just love that authority that you had, that you owned over your body, your baby, your partner, your time, your environment, your music. Like, that is such an incredible lesson in autonomy in a situation that you have very little control over, and such a beautiful lesson for parenting, because that's also what we really try to set people up for. Like you mentioned, the toddler choices, right? Parenting is nothing if not everything being out of your control and just trying to make the best of it and finding some control in the chaos. And your birth and your ownership of your birth is such a beautiful example of how we want parents to go into, take control over, take authority over their birth. The way that you spoke about these things and the way that you shared your journey was so powerful. So I really love everything that you had to say about all of it.
If there's one thing I will say, I've noticed a lot of us who get called to do this work, birth work, it seems like we get to go on different journeys. That whether it be hubris or whatever you want to call it, we're like, no, I'm going to have the perfect birth. Are you kidding? I've seen it a billion times. It's going to be great. And then some of us get taken on a ride where we're like, but I know for a fact it doesn't have to be like, okay, well, if this is where we're going, this is where we're going. And I really have allowed it to be informing of how I practice and how I reach out to people now. And I'm really grateful for this platform and this opportunity to talk to the both of you and share this story, because one of the things I try to do when people come to me for acudoula is remind them that however you envision your birth and then whatever you fear it's going to be, likely not going to be either of those. It's going to fall somewhere in the middle. I had 2 births last week, and 2 second-time moms within 3 years saw their estimated guest date and went right past it. And second-timers, we're usually like, I'll be surprised if you see your due date. Especially these 2 on the 10th and the 13th, you won't be pregnant. So these kids were like, everybody thinks they know what's up. And so we had to sit down, and I asked, what are you afraid of in this birth? What is the worst case scenario? One of them was not seeing her hospital birth center birth. It was being down the hall in L&D. And I'm like, okay, so what does that look like? The second one, she was wanting to be outside the hospital system. She wanted to be at the birth center. Okay, so what if we go to the hospital on Monday night? What if you're still pregnant Monday night and we go to the hospital? What are we going to do? How are we going to go in and own that room just like we're going to go in and own the birth center? How can we go in with the same wonderful energy? This is going to be a beautiful birth. How do we yes and the situation? And both of them, the second we had those conversations, the very next day, that baby shows up. The very next day, that baby was like, all right, mom let go of her fears. We can roll now. And so if you can remind people that even when not one thing goes right, even when every single thing about this situation is nothing you would have asked for, it can still be perfect. How is it perfect even in this? And I really feel like that's what my birth showed me. That's what Sage has shown me every day of his 3.5 years. Because for as cute as he is also smart and crafty and determined and stubborn. I don't know where he gets it from. But, these are our first lessons in parenting. Can you listen to your child? Can you listen to that inner voice? Can you get quiet enough to admit to yourself what you don't want to admit to yourself? Because if so, that's going to make you a better parent for this child. It's going to make you a better partner for your partner. It's going to make you better capable to thrive in whatever this journey sends your way. Because parenting is not for the faint of heart, and birth is only cracking the book open.
I think you wrapped this episode up beautifully. I'm going to leave it at that. I will put Mama Shani's information in the show notes below. and we will be having her back on in the future to talk about what she does and why she does what she does for our community. She's pretty fantastic. Thank you for being here, and we will see you all next week.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.